All right, trying some new locations for my live streams, and I think I got a little bit of a better setup here today. So a little bit different camera, different location, different microphone, and I want to start doing more live streams, and also hopefully I'll have some interviews coming up. So I'm looking into which software to use to actually, have people on for guests. So if you guys have any suggestions for me, please leave that in the comments on what's the easiest to use. I've been looking online and there's a lot of different ones to pick from, a lot of free options. And I'm not sure what most of the YouTube guys are doing for their interviews, which app they're using. It's kind of crazy that YouTube doesn't have invite guests on the live stream where you can just send it straight off YouTube, which is kind of bizarre because most of the other applications have that built in to the platform, and YouTube is still behind on that. So I find that kind of crazy. So, but I'm just hanging out today, talking about obscure titles, talking about new releases, books on music, general questions, general conversation, just hanging out on a Friday. Again, testing out a new location for my live streams and trying to figure out what software is the best to use to have guests on, because I do have some interviews coming up, and I'm excited about doing that. So I just want to figure out what the best way to do that is, the easiest way to be able to invite guests. And, because just it's not built into the YouTube platform. So you have to use another streaming service to stream to YouTube in order to bring the guests on at this point. So if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear what you think is the best to use. So I want to talk about, though, the issue of new releases and why few people seem to be so interested in new recorded material. And to some, I can kind of understand it. I mean, if you go to a lot of the young people, they're into Taylor Swift and all these pop artists, Dua Lipa, and all these different pop artists, which, in my opinion, I wouldn't consider them to be on the same level of musicianship as what we've had in the past. That's just my personal opinion. You might disagree with me there, but I'd like to do a lot of reviews of new material, recorded material, like these two that I did from Italy, which are fantastic records, and nobody seems to be interested. I had a guy come by and leave a comment and say that you need to start doing more mainstream album reviews so you get more views. And I do mainstream album reviews, like All the Acoustic Sounds, Atlantic 75th, and a lot of other ones I do. And those, obviously, they get more views than this one here, which is unfortunate. Back, when I grew up, looking for new music was something that we all, were interested in doing. We all were interested in when a friend or somebody recommended a new album, we were always, oh, let me check it out. Sometimes we wouldn't like it, but oftentimes we would. And that's how you would discover new musicians. But nowadays, people don't seem to be too interested in that. And it's a shame, because record labels like Bird Box Records here, they're, something like this, they're in Italy. They have their own analog recording studio. And they're recording some wonderful music, jazz music, and something that is not being done in, very often, where you have a complete analog recording studio trying to promote new jazz music. And that's the kind of stuff that I want to have on my channel. Same thing with this Jerome Sabah record here that I did a review on, and all these got less than 100 hits. So they're right around 100 views, and that's it. And this is another analog recording that's fantastic. This was recorded analog, and analog source to vinyl. And to me, these are cool. It's something worth having in my collection. Wonderful music, and it sounds really good. But people are more interested in the Blue Note, Tone Poet um, reviews, or the acoustic sounds, all these reissues, which I love as well. I love all those reissues, and I think they sound fantastic. But I do think that there is a lack of interest in newly recorded music in general. And again, there's some reason for that, and it's because a lot of the new music just really isn't worth having on vinyl. But this stuff certainly is. So let me know what you guys think. I do want to show you some more records, and I do want to talk about. So I'm going to show you a couple of good books on music if you're a reader like I am. If you're want to learn about jazz, this is a fantastic book here. It's about 700 pages and a lot of interesting material in here that basically starts off and gives you a brief history of jazz, goes into the different musicians by different eras, and then goes into jazz musicians by instrument, which is pretty interesting because you learn a lot about a lot of players that you've never heard of. So there's a whole chapter in here on trumpet, and it has all the different trumpet players. A chapter on the saxophone, clarinet, trombone, and it goes through all those great classic players and a lot of players that I've a pretty big jazz collection. And there's people in here that I've never heard of, which is good and bad, because if I find somebody that I've never heard of, I end up going and investigating, and I end up spending more money because I buy another record and that anyhow. But this is a really good book worth getting. It's a good read. It's not a boring read. And so it's not too technical. At the same time, it's very readable and tells you stories of these musicians and talks about the albums and recordings and things like that. So I do recommend picking this book up. Another one, if you're a vinyl junkie, this is a fantastic book. I'm not quite done with it yet, but this is a really cool book if you're interested in the history of the 33 RPM long playing record, because this really goes into, the long playing record came out around 1948, and really the record companies didn't know exactly the best way to utilize this format, other than being able to have be able to play a whole classical piece on two sides versus having 6 records or something, 78s. Other than just the length, they really didn't know the best way to use this format. And this book goes into that, especially from the jazz point of view, and talks about Ellington, talks about how the live performance became important, but not just, you have live recordings that were recorded live from beginning to end, and you had that feeling of being in the studio with the jazz musicians, right? But then also you had like the Ellington Newport recording, George Avakian, and a lot of editing went into that, which a lot of people don't realize, that when you listen to that Newport recording of Ellington, that they actually went back and went into the studio and fixed things. And that's the fixes are on the record. Back then, of course, it's all analog tape. And it's interesting because they had booked, George Avakian had already booked the studio after the Newport event was recorded, like before it was recorded. So before the event took place, Avakian had already booked the studio for Ellington and his players. And that was for 2 reasons. One, obviously, so you can go back and fix something if it was botched up during the performance. But at the same time, it kind of gave a level of kind of let the musicians play without worrying about having that stuck on the record for the rest of their lives. And if you read this book, it talks about that, how the some of the musicians, they felt more comfortable that they can go out and play without being reserved, that they knew that if they botched something up, had a blew a note somewhere, that they could actually go back, they'd be in the studio the following week and they can fix those. And Avakian was a master at actually editing those early recordings in the mid-50s, those live recordings, because he knew how to go in and use reverb and different tactics in order to cover up those actual botched notes, where they went back into the studio later and actually recorded those. They fixed those notes, play over it. He would splice in the tape, use a little bit of reverb over the whole thing, and you'd never hear it. So anyway, this book here is a really cool book if you're interested in learning about the 33 RPM long playing record. And it just goes into the whole history of it and also the music production side of it. You know, the whole thing of leaving the conversations like the Miles Davis, he's talking over the beginning of songs on different albums, and they were marketing this as hear the jazz musicians as they, you know, they're working on what they're going to play in the studio, and then you hear like a 7 or 8 minute song, which you could never hear before, because 78 you were stuck to about 3 minutes on each side. So this really goes into all of the different ways the record companies look to market the LP and the different things that they tried. You know, you had 3 different formats. A lot of people don't know you had the 3 different 33 RPM formats. You have a 7-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch. Of course, the 12-inch is what eventually won out because you could just fit more music on it. But there was a psychological point to it all, because people were used to buying the 78s. And so the 10-inch record was very marketable following the 78. People, just a psychological thing. When you went into the record store and you saw the same size record, but now it had, you know, you could fit a lot more on it. That was a psychological thing. It was a way to market to people. Whereas the 12-inch record was kind of startling to people at the time. It was a lot larger than the 10-inch. So there was a lot that went into it, and this book really covers it. And so if you're into learning about vinyl records and the whole history of the LP from a jazz perspective, this is definitely a good book. I would recommend this highly. It's a good read. It does get into some of the politics and things like that, but it's mostly focused on the music, what went on in the studios, how the different companies marketed the records. Goes into Riverside Records, talks about Warren Keep News, talks about Columbia Records. So you get some information about the small record companies as well as the larger record companies who had a much larger budget to work with. So when you see those Riverside Records, those are pretty much a couple of takes and at the beginning, and they picked the best take. Then they did get into editing, even Warren Keep News. You know, when it came to Monk's album Brilliant Corners, that's a heavily edited song, Brilliant Corners, because they couldn't get it right in the studio, like 30 takes or something, 27 takes, and he had to splice it together to get a workable, listenable take. So pretty interesting stuff. If you guys have any comments, please leave them, and I also want to hear your feedback on what you want to see more record reviews of. So I've got more obscure records I want to talk about. And again, I think that this is one of the, you know, because I think a lot of people don't do obscure record reviews because you don't get any you don't get any reviews. For me, luckily, I don't make very much on this channel because most of my videos are demonetized because I do needle drops and I play the songs, and every once in a while I'll get shared revenue, but most of the time it'll say demonetized, not eligible, or ineligible. And so, you know, like over the last, I don't know, 4 months, I think I've got like $30. So it's not like I'm getting paid a lot, but I do this for fun. I do this out of the love of just music and sharing records with you guys. Like this one here, I did a review on, got like 100 hits, 100 views. And it's like, this is an awesome album. I mean, and people just unfortunately aren't interested. But the way I see it is, even if 100 people look at it, if you know, a couple people are exposed to it and share it with somebody else and they like it and they bought the record, then to me, that's a good thing. You know, it's, again, not really here for popularity. I do appreciate it when you guys like the videos and share them or comment on them. I really like when you comment on the videos and stuff, because I always learn when you guys comment on the channel. And so for me, that's just part of the fun of it. So it's kind of it's a hobby for me. So this album here, another one I did a review on. This is fantastic. If you like modern kind of progressive jazz, this is awesome. And all analog, right from the studio where it was recorded. and it sounds fantastic. This is a great record. I got like less than 100 hits on it, 100 views on it. And again, it's, to me, it's like, this is something really cool and all analog, which all the, you know, a lot of the vinyl junkies out there, that's what they want, all analog from source to the record. And, you know, I do these reviews on these, and, you know, if I do a yes review, I'll get a couple thousand views. Again, my channel is very small. I've got a little over 1,000 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed, please do that. I appreciate that. And hopefully, again, it just gets the word out of good music and gives you guys a different type of review that I can actually drop the needle on. You guys can listen to it with me. And a lot of times I haven't even opened the record. I'm opening it for the first time with you guys, which again, to me, that's kind of fun for me to do. So this is another great album that I do recommend. You can still pick these up, all analog. And if, you know, Simon Phillips is just a great drummer, but you've got Greg Howe on here too, who is just an awesome guitar player. And this is a fabulous record. So I'm going to definitely plug that one. Another one that's all analog. This is if you're into big band, not everybody's into big band, but this is a fabulous sounding album. And I don't think I've done a full review of this or a needle drop, and I need to do that. So I'm probably going to do that coming up, because this is a 2-record set. This is celebrating Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, the whole big band. But this thing sounds spectacular, and you've got 2 different versions of the same recording on here. So I think this would make a good video to play a song off of each one and listen to the difference back to back. And so disc 1 is live studio session directly cut to vinyl. The second one is the same session via 24-track mix down to 1/2-inch tape at 30 IPS. So I think this would make a good video, a fun video to do and say, okay, let's see which one sounds better. Or really what I like to say is not which one sounds better, but what's the difference between the two. And I think that's another thing that people kind of forget is we all want to tell everybody what sounds the best, but a lot of times it just sounds different. And I might like the way something sounds. You know, I might like it to be maybe a little more bass heavy, or, you know, some people like a brighter sound. And a lot of times it's subjective. Now, certainly you can spend a lot of money on equipment, and it's going to sound better most of the time. You know, your listening environment matters, but everything comes into play. What kind of speakers you have, the amplifiers, the preamps, etc. What kind of turntable, the cartridge, and all this stuff. But what I like to point out, because I'm using mid-fi equipment, I'm using a Fluence turntable with an RT85 Ortofon, RT85 Fluence with the Ortofon Blue. I'm using $150 shit Monty preamp, going into some pretty nice speakers, Yamaha HS8 speakers, which are pretty nice. That's probably the what makes the system really sound better than the equipment that it's going through. Shit Monty, though, is a great preamp for $150. The Fluence at $500. RT85 is a great buy, as is the RT85N if you're into the Nagoka cartridges. So for that mid-level type thing, and I like to do the reviews on that. And I think it appeals to more people, because not a lot of people can afford to go out and spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on a table, or this $1,000 on a preamp and so forth. So I think that for the average person, if they can buy a turntable for $500, a preamp for $150, and then maybe spend a little more money on your speakers or your amplifier. The nice thing about the Yamaha HS8s is that they're powered speakers, and they're good size, and for a small room, they work very well. So, you can get away for a couple of $1,000, you can get yourself a nice mid-level system that sounds decent, that won't tear up your records, and you can get a nice listening experience with. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this channel. This is not a quote unquote hi-fi channel where I've got all this hi-fi equipment. Frankly, I can't afford to spend that kind of money on equipment. So, but I am going to do this review here coming up. Again, 2 different records, both analog, but one is cut directly to vinyl, and the other one comes via the 24-track mixed down tape. So you get 2 different sounds all analog sourced to vinyl, but done a different way. So I'm going to do this coming up soon. And I think it'll be a fun video to do. Some other albums that again didn't get a lot of. I did a review on this Tubby Hayes, and I didn't get a lot of views on this one, but this is a fantastic album. And I don't know if this is actually sourced from the analog tapes, but this is a very nice sounding live record. And really, I'm not that familiar with Tubby Hayes. And this, I think, went on sale online, and it was like $19.99 or something like that. And I just listened to it on streaming, and I said, this is pretty good. So I picked it up, did a review on it. And there was a couple people that commented on it, which they said they really liked the record. But again, this is one of those that I thought was a really nice sounding record, and again, didn't get a lot of views. Okay. Couple of other ones from Japan. I do like these Japanese artists. And this is a really nice sounding album, Scenery, and by Ryo Fukui. Again, forgive my bad pronunciation, but this is a really nice sounding album that, you know, I don't think got a lot of publicity. I do want to talk about another book here, which is called Straight No Chaser by Thelonious Monk. So if you're a Monk fan, this is probably, I've got 4 different biographies of Monk, and I've gotten into this one, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through. And I think that this is probably the most digestible book on Monk, because it straddles the line between being very detailed, where you get those books that are kind of dry reading and they're very dry and they go into all these minute details. And then you get other ones that kind of more read like a novel. This is a nice balance between the two, where it's a good read. There's a lot of narrative in there. It does talk about his life and his relationships with other people. And then it does get into some of the details of the recordings and so forth. And what I find interesting about Monk, because when you hear about Monk, he comes across as this strange, odd character who was kind of mentally imbalanced and spinning around on stage and doing all this stuff. But when you read about him, and from the people that knew him, they said that he, was a very colorful guy, character, like very a great personality, a great sense of humor is what I get after reading 3 of these biographies on him. That he liked to play jokes on people. And so when people used to kind of take him a certain way, he would kind of run with that. And so I think a lot of times where people thought that Monk was kind of out there, and don't get me wrong, he did have a mental illness, which I think was exaggerated by the treatment he received. But a lot of times he would kind of jerk people's chains a bit on that. And this book here, probably, if you're going to buy one book on Monk, this is probably the one I would buy. Straight No Chaser by Leslie Gorse. So, yeah. All right, another album I recommend. This one again didn't get a whole lot of fanfare. Is this Masayo Nakajima Quartet, and another one of those Japanese bands. This is a nice sounding album, and again, I did some reviews on these types of albums, and they got very few views. But I think these are definitely worth checking out. Something different. And, all these reissues, this is a reissue as well. As well as this one here, which is a very interesting album. I did a full review on this. Again, it got under 100 hits, but this quartet is awesome. 2 albums, a 2 record set. And these are reissues, but they're kind of obscure reissues. And that kind of leads me to my next talking point. Get a little drink here. My next talking point is talking about obscure releases and why still people aren't interested in investigating or looking into more obscure titles. Because we all know all the Blue Note stuff that's coming out now. And I think personally, I think some of the Blue Note stuff, they're starting to put out things that wasn't the best material, especially the stuff in the late 60s and the 70s. In my opinion, some of the Blue Note stuff that gets into that funk stuff and is not my favorite. And so a lot of the releases that have come out lately, I have not purchased. It just didn't interest me. And I've got so many jazz releases now, so many reissues from Blue Note, that some of these are just not, they don't interest me. So when I come across some of these reissues like this that are very obscure from Japan, and these guys can play. And this is really, to me, a very intense record. Again, I did a full review on it. You can go back and check that out. But a lot of people just weren't interested in it. And so, that from my generation, we were always interested in learning about new musicians and new music and things that people didn't know about. And a lot of times we, friends and family members would recommend music and stuff that we'd never heard of before. And we'd be like, oh, wow, man, I really dig that. And so that's kind of the vibe that I try to carry on to this channel. Is like, oh, man, I ran across this really cool record that's really obscure. And the first pressing of this was, they didn't make very many of them. And back then, a lot of these Japanese titles, they didn't have the money to market them. And so in Japan, these small record companies weren't very successful. And the American musicians were the ones like Art Blakey and these other guys were very popular in Japan. And some of these guys really didn't get their, I think, fair share of recognition. So I like to do reviews of that kind of stuff as well. So leave your comments. For those of you who are watching, is there anything that you guys are interested in seeing reviews of? I'm definitely interested in doing more reviews on obscure titles or new titles. So like the ones that I showed you here from Italy, and this one from Jerome Sabah, which is all analog. So I do want to do more of those, but if you guys have any suggestions, let me know in the chat or in the comments. And I'm going to probably keep this going for a few more minutes on this Friday. Thanks for joining me and hanging out. If you're watching this at a later time, again, feel free to leave your comments. I'm going to start doing more of these live streams. And so, and also I've got some interviews coming up, as I mentioned earlier. And so I'm looking to figure out what is the best software to use to bring in guests onto the YouTube stream. I don't really want to pay a monthly subscription. So if you guys know what the best streaming software to use that's free, that you can do just one other guest, another option I think is to use Skype and record it and then put it onto YouTube. But I would really like to do a live stream and have guests on and be able to send a link out. And so I'd like to know what software people are using, what's the most popular free software to use to do that, to have those guests on YouTube and stream and send out a link so that you can have other people on and do an interview. So I'm going to try to set up an interview with one of the guitar players, Claudio Quartarone. I did reviews of both of these albums, which are fantastic, all analog from Italy, wonderful guitar playing, jazzy, kind of classical. And so I got an email from him, and I'm going to try to set up an interview. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I have everything set up and that it's going to be a quality interview. It's going to look good and sound good. And so that's kind of what I'm working on now. So if you guys have any suggestions, again, please leave your comments. I appreciate your feedback and your participation in the channel. And for me, again, this is just a hobby for me. And I just have always, been into music, and I like to share good sounding records with you guys and do needle drops and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm going to do is kind of use this area here. I think this is probably the best setup for kind of live streams and interviews from this particular computer here. And then I'll do my needle drops and all that kind of stuff, regular videos from my listening room. So that's kind of what I'm looking at doing, just because of the way everything's set up here, and the the audio that I've got in here is a bit different, and the computer that I have is better in this particular room here where I do my recording. This room here is kind of like what I call the bar area, but I'll also use this computer to actually record music, my own music on here. So it's kind of like my little recording studio as well, where I can plug in my guitars, and I can set up things and record right here in this room. So that's kind of what I'm going to use this room for, is for the live streams. And so again, if you guys have any suggestions on live streams, what topics you want to see covered, what kind of conversations, and hopefully we'll get more people to participate in these and have some fun and talk about music and talk about record albums and whatever other topics come up regarding music. And I try to keep this channel strictly focused on music and staying out of any kind of other political opinions and things like that. And some people, get into that stuff. This is just about music and something where people can come and relax and have fun and learn about records and hear the records played. And that's kind of the vibe here on this channel. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Leave your comments, give me some thumbs up or share, and hopefully we'll get more momentum going with the live streams, and hopefully I'll be able to get more interviews as I get going. Again, I'm excited about interviewing this guitar player from Italy and talking to him about recording these, talking to him about the recording studio and learning guitar and all that kind of stuff is really a lot of fun. And you can always learn so much from other musicians. And to me, that's just, what makes it fun. So, all right, I will talk to you later. Happy listening to all you guys. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and we will see you later on. Stay tuned for some other reviews coming up.